Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that everyone will be on mute for the duration of the webinar, but you can ask questions at any point by typing them into the question box, and we'll go through them at the end. We'll be sending the slide deck and a recording to all registrants, so everyone will get a copy, and we'll just give it another minute or so for more people to join. Okay, thank you everyone for joining. As I say, please do pop your questions into the question box and Paul will run through them at the end of the webinar. With that, I'll hand over to you, Paul.
All right, great. Thank you, Chris. And welcome everybody. Thanks for coming into my bonus room for this webcast. When we started to see the very quick transition that organizations were forced to go through to very quickly spin up remote work and get people working from home, at least on the IT Pro side and the Microsoft MVP side, there was a lot of conversations that got started about, wow, how do you do this? I think some of us take for granted that, of course, you can work from home. And of course, Teams and Microsoft's other tools deliver the ability to work from anywhere. That's the propaganda Microsoft has been giving us for years and years and years. But the truth is that ability is not really evenly distributed. Not everybody has it. And a lot of companies and individuals have been forced to try to grow that ability very quickly. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some practical things that you can do quickly to help get your organization more capable of doing remote work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about business continuity and sort of the situation that we're all in, mostly from a technology standpoint, and then give you what I hope will be some specific actionable tips that you can use to jumpstart getting teams rolling in your organization to help people work more effectively remotely. I don't really have a whole lot to say about COVID-19. Everybody's heard of it. You all know what it is. There's nothing I can add to that. I'm not an epidemiologist or a doctor, but wash your hands. With that said, Microsoft did something they don't normally do this past week, and they released an update about usage of Teams. They normally do that as part of their financial reporting. So at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the fiscal quarter, they like to talk about how many more million users they've added for Azure or Office 365 or Teams. They mostly like to do that because they're trying to juice their stock price, if I'm honest. But they took an unusual step and announced that they had added more than 12 million new daily users. Now, you can quibble, right? Was it exactly 12 million? Was it 12 million and 75? We don't know, and it doesn't matter. It basically represented close to a 25% increase in the number of people who are using Teams every day, which is remarkable no matter how you cut it. That was all driven by the prevalence of immediate telework or work from home. On our side, one thing that's been interesting at Quadrotech, as many of you know, one of our lines of business is managed migration as a service. So you come to us and we migrate your users, your data, your PST files, your archives to the cloud. We've had multiple customers come to us and say, holy smokes, you guys, we don't have OA. We don't have any remote mail capability. And now all of a sudden, all of our employees are forced to work from home and they can't. Can you please speed up our migration? It's a little surprising. I mean, it makes sense when you think about it, but we didn't expect that. If I were doing this in a room, number one, the Centers for Disease Control would come yell at me because I'm not social distancing. But I would ask you to raise your hand if your organization already had a pandemic response plan before this happened. I'm lucky in that one of the people on my team, Mike Weaver, who owns my tenant-to-tenant product, used to be one of the people on the pandemic response committee at a very large U.S. insurance company. So he was able to give me some insight into the mechanics of how these processes work. But most small and medium-sized organizations have never had to plan for anything like this because it wasn't a thing that we worried about happening. Welcome to 2020. So the response after all this COVID stuff started happening has really been mixed. There have been some industries or companies that already had a large percentage of people who could and did work remotely. That's one thing that's interesting to think about. You have to think about the combination of, is a particular job role capable of being done remotely? And then are the people who do it willing and able to do it remotely? So for example, I'm based in Huntsville, Alabama, where the Marshall Space Flight Center and the U.S. Army's aviation and missile research and development centers are. And there's a lot of stuff that those actual rocket scientists do that you can't do at home, right? It's just not possible without equipment and facilities and security that individual people in their homes and apartments don't have. But for the most part, most of the world is still centered around the notion that work is a place you go to every day to do whatever it is you do. There are cultural reasons behind that. There are business and operational reasons. There are investment reasons. None of that matters, right? It is what it is. It's really important to understand that even in companies that support remote work, not every role inside the company is automatically able to switch right away. So I don't want the perfect to be the enemy of the good. I'd rather focus on the things that you can do quickly to remote enable the people who want to work remotely and whose job functions can be done remotely. If you manufacture airplanes or you run chemical plants or you operate a hospital, there's very little that I can do to help you understand how to enable those functions. But for the information worker and the people who are involved in the back end of the business, there's a lot we can do to help. So why am I talking about this? Well, over the last 22 years, and this is easy to track because I started working full-time remotely from home right before my second son was born, and he turns 22 in April. So out of that time, for a little more than 16 years, I've been working full-time from home in a home office, no other employees, nobody but me and the cat and my kids. And I've been working with Microsoft's collaboration and communication tools back since Exchange Instant Messaging was actually a server role. Only people who are really old will probably remember this, but I've been doing this. This has been my life for a long while. So I like to think that I have some knowledge about it. More immediately, if you look at the people that I routinely interact with and work with every single day as part of my core team, the people who work for me, the people I work for, the people on other teams who are my closest peers, they're literally all over the place, okay, from Bulgaria to California. And so working remotely across time zones and being able to collaborate and get stuff done is really important to me because I couldn't work without it. Finally, Quadrotech's Nova platform, which is the product that I own and drive, we put a lot of effort and a lot of focus into this to help provide functionality, help companies understand what they're getting for their license value, whether they're spending wisely, whether people are using the tools that are in front of them. So even before all this started, we'd spent a fair amount of time analyzing why don't people work remotely more? What are the things that hold them back? And so I hope the combination of these three things will let me give you some insight that will help. What I want to do in this webcast, and I promise I'm about to get to the good stuff, I want to help you understand how to deploy teams broadly and quickly to better support remote working. Okay, one thing that's important, I'm not here to try to give you tips that are focused on end users. And by that, I mean there are plenty of sites out there. Tony Redmond wrote a very good article last week. Doug Strayman-Side did a great community call last week about things end users need to know. Like you should turn on background blur to reduce distractions for other people when you use video. And don't pressure people to turn on their video because not everybody wants to get dressed up nicely and fix their hair and makeup and shave their face and so on. I'm not going to try to abstain from those tips and focus more on things for the system administrator, the IT architect, the technical people who have to do the plumbing and labor work to get this set up so those end users can work. So when you walk out of here, I want to help you have a better understanding of where your organization is right now versus where you need to be to fully support remote work. Okay, I want to start with some good news. If you're here, that means almost certainly you already have Office 365. And if you do, you already have a really good basket of tools to enable remote work. You truly can do 100% of most information work tasks remotely using just what's in the E3 or E5 subscription. Can you do more stuff or have a broader range of scenarios that you can work in if you buy some extra licenses? Sure. But when you think about the core workloads that are part of an E3 or E5 or their government or academic equivalents, you get email with mobile access, you get meetings and chat and whiteboarding and application sharing, you get file sharing and co-editing, co-editing is incredibly powerful, y'all. If you haven't tried it, end user tip, you're really missing out. It is so flexible and powerful. And then a bunch of other stuff, planning, task management, video sharing through Stream, captioning, shared presentation, and so on. What I would say in summary is that, if you already had a plan and you've already gotten people enabled for remote work, great. That's really good to know. But the old aphorism about the best time to plant a tree definitely applies. Even if you haven't done it before now, the second best time to do it is right now. So I'm encouraging you to think about it positively instead of focusing on all the things that maybe didn't get done. Now, with that out of the way, I want to turn to some practical tips that I hope will be helpful to you. The first is decide what good looks like. One of the things that Nova does as a platform is help people understand where users are adopting workloads in the organization. So we often get customers who come to us and say, hey, I need to know how many people are using Teams or how many people are using OneDrive. And then I need to increase that percentage because Microsoft is making me or because I want to increase my license value. So part of that conversation is always understanding what does good look like? Favorite phrase of my boss. You can start this process just with pencil and paper and say, okay, what does a good remote working outcome look like for your particular business, right? I can't give you a one-size-fits-all template because when I look at the list of registrants from this event, I've got people in the technology industry, software, manufacturing, retail, financial services, pharmaceutical, life sciences, government, and what works for one organization or one category of organizations might be completely different from somebody else. So for you and your business, whatever it is you do, what does good look like? Maybe it's just everybody does what they normally do, but they do it from a desk at home, okay? Or maybe there are some other changes that have to happen. Maybe you have to transition into, it's a great example, Delta Airlines, as they have been trying to deal with the huge surge of flight cancellations and flight changes, took a hangar in the Atlanta airport and filled it up with cubicles. Now it's not such a great idea in retrospect now that we know more about social distancing, but they filled it up with additional reservation agents. They were able to surge that capacity very quickly. Then they moved to a model where all their reservation agents are now able to work from home. So you need to think about for your business from an IT perspective, what can you do to support changing the way that the business works in order to make it more effective? Then next, think about how you can get the most possible value in the shortest possible amount of time. For most of us, that means driving Teams instant messaging and meetings. Why do I say that? Well, I would assume everybody's already got email deployed. If you're on Office 365, maybe not 90, maybe 88% of the organizations I deal with start with email in the cloud. Okay, there are some folks at Microsoft who teasingly talk about email as being the gateway drug to Office 365, but it is. So I'm going to assume that everybody already has email up and going, and that you're looking for, okay, what can I do? What's a one or two things that I can do that will most help people work remotely? And the answer is get Teams going for IM and meetings. enterprise voice, Teams rooms, and there's all kinds of great stuff that Teams can do that you can save for later. Right now, what you want is you want somebody in one department who's working at their home office in Huntsville to be able to talk to a counterpart in another department who's working from their home office in Houston. Okay, that's what this is about. And Teams instant messaging and meetings are the quickest way to that value. The things that you want to do are listed in the queue from a business perspective. You want to enable people to talk to each other, keep work moving, remove the penalty of saying, oh, well, you're working from home in a different time zone or in a different environment where you don't have immediate access to all the people you need. You can't do away with that penalty completely. Remember that map I showed of my team? There's always going to be a time difference between me and Vasil Michev on my team. He's in Bulgaria, I'm not. We're not in the same time zone. But smart use of Teams means that we can minimize that penalty so when we're both online, we can get together quickly and knock out what we need to do. Give people flexibility so they can work from where they need to, whether that's an isolated cabin in the woods, a secure underground bunker, their apartment house, etc. Right? And then finally, provide enough flexibility so that as the situation evolves, you're able to flex along with it. Okay, next, set up your network for success. This probably should have been 2 or 3 slides because there's a lot here. So the first thing, Microsoft has been talking for a couple of months now about the optimum way to arrange network traffic on your network to support Office 365. Now, this is going to vary by organization. If you use a VPN, what you don't want is you don't want traffic that's going to the service to flow from the end user endpoint into your network and then onward to Office 365. All that's going to do is force a bunch of traffic onto your network that you don't want. Instead, what you want to do is you want to enable and deploy split VPN tunneling so that traffic for your organizational network goes to the organizational network through the VPN, and traffic for Office 365, which goes to a well-defined set of endpoints that Microsoft has published, won't. Now, the thing about that is there are a lot of other benefits to doing that split tunneling, and if you set it up right, you will also keep people's Netflix traffic and porn viewing and everything else that you don't want on your corporate network, but that may be going on at people's home computers off your network also. Microsoft has a good, thorough article. And remember, you're all going to get a copy of this deck, so don't worry about scrambling to write down the URLs here. Microsoft has a good article explaining what the connection endpoints are, what their IP ranges are, and what you need to do to configure split tunneling. Next, this is a big sentence that is packing a lot in, but update reasonable conditional access policies if you already have conditional access deployed. I love conditional access in Office 365 and Azure. It's immensely powerful. It's very flexible, and it gives us a set of capabilities we've never had before. But it also lets you blow things up or break things in a way that can be very difficult to fix. So if you don't already have conditional access policies deployed, this is probably not the best time to start. Okay. Now, with that said, there are 2 caveats to that statement. One is conditional access policies now have a report-only mode where you put the policy into place, and then you'll see reports telling you which policies would have applied. It's probably not a bad idea to experiment with that with a very small set of knowledgeable technical pilot users to give you comfort and familiarity with the technology. And I would encourage you to do that. Just be careful to make sure that you understand the impact of policies, because it's really easy to build a policy, for example, that blocks everyone from using Exchange Online, or that only lets people use Teams if they're, I don't know, at the Havana airport or something like that. Because the policies are so flexible. Those of you who have worked with group policy for a long time remember what that was like when it was first introduced. There was so much power there and so little experience and knowledge that a lot of people made a lot of painful mistakes that they then had to undo. Okay, step 3 or tip 3, use service quality monitoring. So many of you were affected by the Teams outage on March 16th. It was the result of a complex cascade of problems, but basically you can boil it down to there was a lot more load than Microsoft anticipated. It came online much more quickly. The problem in a distributed remote environment, if you think about the typical pattern of an outage, when everybody's in the office, Alice will get up and walk down the hall and stick her head in Bob's office and say, "Hey, Bob, I can't log into Teams. Is it working for you?" And Bob will say, go ask Carol. And the two of them will walk down the hall and go ask Carol. And at some point, they'll just reach a consensus decision that, oh yeah, Teams is obviously broken. Well, it's a lot harder to do that when Alice and Bob and Carol are in the same office, number one. It's even harder to do it if the tool that they're using to talk to each other is the tool that's broken. So service quality monitoring, like the monitoring features in Nova, will help you as the IT lead understand when there are problems with the service so you can proactively do things like tell your service desk or send an email notification to users to help them understand what's going on. Okay, choose the right features. This is sort of a combination of an IT pro tip and an end user tip. You may have heard that in some European countries, Netflix is reducing the resolution of the movies and shows that they're streaming to save aggregate network bandwidth. Well, Microsoft already did that. They have turned down the maximum resolution you can get for a Teams video stream to try to reduce the impact on their network. Because without going into all the details of the way Teams multiplexing works, if I've got 10 people who are all sending video to a 10-party or 10-person meeting, then all 10 of those video streams have to go from each client to Microsoft to be multiplexed and then sent back out. So the bigger the meeting is, the more people are using video, the more network impact there is. So it's a tricky balance, right? Video is a very powerful modality to help people feel connected because they can see each other. And you get a lot more interpersonal bandwidth by being able to look at people's body language and facial expressions and so on. But it also can punish the network. The bigger problem is you need to be mindful of the fact not everybody is going to have the same experience. So I have coworkers who are in different countries with different internet speeds, different quality of Wi-Fi equipment, different quality of webcams. And although I'm lucky, I have gigabit internet, I have a good webcam and a well-lit room, not everybody does, right? So just be mindful of the fact that not every feature in Teams is going to be appropriate for you to enable or recommend the use of 100% of the time. Finally, the last tip, assign the right licenses. This is tricky, right? What we found fairly early on at Quadrotech is that there were a lot of Teams calling features that we couldn't use because those features were not available in the geographies where we had employees. So for example, I can't buy a calling license for users in Switzerland. Microsoft doesn't sell it. I could, and I don't recommend this, but it would be technically possible for me to take those Switzerland users and change their usage location to the United States or the UK, and then buy those licenses and assign them and give them US or UK phone numbers. My point in talking about this is not to suggest that you get tricky with licenses and usage locations, but instead to point out one of the things you will need to know is to very quickly audit who doesn't have the features or doesn't have the licenses that they need in order to do their jobs. For example, I could sit down right now in any of the tenants who are using Nova and give you a report of all the users who have Power BI and all the users who have Visio and all the users who have all the various add-on Teams licenses, and make sure that those licenses are assigned to the right people. Okay, suppose I have some critical piece of the organization that's working remotely and they really need phone capability. I can figure out, okay, who has these licenses now? What's my plan? Am I going to buy more for the people who need them? Am I going to take licenses away from the people who don't need them as much? Those are business questions, but you won't get the answer. You won't get the data you need to come up with the right answer for your business unless you can see what licenses people have and how they're being used. Okay, I want to preface this slide by saying if you're already using Teams, you can skip the content on this slide. The horse has left the barn, right? We deployed Teams pretty much on day one. As soon as it was in GA, we started using it. And so as a result, we have a bit of a sprawl where we have more teams and channels than we do employees. That's not uncommon. It reminds me of public folders back when those were still a thing. If you let anybody create a team, then anybody will create a team. And that's not necessarily bad, but it can become a management challenge, especially in large organizations. There are a couple ways to tackle that. If you haven't already, now is the time for you to think about, okay, what teams do I actually need to specifically to enable remote work? Okay, you probably need some kind of all hands communication announcement type channel. Depending on your organization, you may want to break that down into specific teams for countries or states or other regions. What we've done at Quadrotech is we've got a team for everybody in the UK, which is maybe 25% of our workforce. Everybody in North America, which is about 30% of our workforce. Everybody in Slovakia, which is about 40% of our workforce, and then an all hands channel that has everybody. That way, if I'm talking about something that's pertinent to North America, I can jump in the North American channel and I don't bother the Brits and vice versa. But that may vary according to where your people are and what they do. You may find that there are things you want to do to support individual business units or business functions that you can't quite manage right now, and that's okay, right? One key principle I want to make sure everybody understands, this is not a technical principle, but it's still really important. Do the best you can with what you have. You may not be able to put the toothpaste back in the tube and get rid of all the team sprawl you already have, but you can avoid making more. And you can help people by giving them training and access to information about things like, how do I manage notifications so I'm just not getting spammed all the time? How do I use quiet hours in Teams? What should I do with the mobile client? There are all kinds of things that you as an IT expert need to be prepared to pass on to people who are not IT experts. They're just as concerned as you are. They're worried about the business, they're worried about their jobs, they're worried about their families, but you can help pour a little bit of water on the flames by helping them not have to worry about IT stuff because you're the expert and you can provide that leadership and that knowledge. A big part of this is understanding where your early adopters are. Now, we always preach this when we talk about adoption, right? Many of you probably fall into this category, but in every organization, you're always going to have people who always want the newest, latest, and greatest things, right? They want the latest insider builds of Windows and Office. If there's a new gadget, they're going to want to use it. If there's a new feature from Microsoft, they're going to have it, or at least know about it before anybody else. Where are those people in your organization? And how can you get them to help you make the transition to remote work? These may be your 200,000 mile a year road warriors who are used to using remote work technologies because they're always traveling. It may be the people who have weird hobbies like amateur radio or aviation. I did promise Tony Redmond I wouldn't talk about airplanes, so I'm going to refrain, but they may be people who are accustomed to having a higher degree of mobility. They may be people who are just deeply interested in the technology, right? Find those people and use them. Find out what's worked for them, leverage them, and get them to help you teach other people. Okay, this is an enormously powerful thing to do for two reasons. One is that it helps take the technical load away from your team, meaning you can focus on the high-end technical problems that only your team can solve. But the other thing is, by using these remote communication tools to do remote communications, you're building a really solid foundation and network that proves to the people who are using them that this stuff can work and that they really can be productive and engaged using these tools. And that's important too. It's important to help people gain confidence that these things work. Okay, let's talk about user coaching. Some of you are probably in roles where you have direct end user support responsibilities. Maybe you own the service desk at your organization. Maybe you're a service desk technician. Others of you will be system administrators or architects or other people who don't work in a role where you directly have contact with users. I'm going to start with the assumption, as I said earlier, that everybody has email. If not, you should probably call me and let's talk about how to get your email migrated to the cloud really quickly so that nobody has to go into the forbidden zone to work on an Exchange server. But assuming that everybody has email, then we can pivot the discussion to talk about, okay, what do you need to tell users as an IT leader? What do you need to tell users quickly so that they will have the basics that they need to work from home? Now, again, if I were in a real room, I would make a joke about the huge number of stupid emails I've gotten from companies telling me how they're responding to COVID-19. I've gotten email from companies that I haven't done business with since 2008 that still have my email address. And I've gotten emails from companies that have no physical presence. The flight planning software company whose product I use sent me an email telling me what they were doing about COVID-19. They're 1,000 miles away from me. They have no offices or facilities. I've never seen any of their employees. Every year they charge my credit card and I download their software, and that's the extent of our relationship. So think about what you need to communicate to your users. Here's who's going to be working remotely. Everybody, some people, some job roles, some locations. And here's what you need to know. Okay, use whatever tools you need to get the job done. I'm just joking. Nobody's ever going to say that, right? But at Quadrotech, we let our salespeople use Zoom because for some customers, they can't join Teams meetings. And we never want to put the customer in a position where they have to say, sorry, I'd really like to talk to you, but I can't join a Teams meeting, so go away. Okay, but we don't support other systems. Maybe you let people use Dropbox. Maybe you don't. You probably aren't going to let them use Google Docs for work products if you have Office 365. My point is you need to tell people so that everybody understands where the support boundary is for the company. The next step, making the support boundaries even more explicit. If there's a problem, who do they call? So I want you to imagine the scenario. You've got a mortgage underwriter, let's say. She's just now been forced to work from home. So she's at home with her kids. Her husband is also working from home, and she needs to print something, and her printer doesn't work. Interesting conundrum. If she needs to print that, whatever it is, to do her work, you should help her. On the other hand, it's not your printer, it's not your computer. It has no connection to your organization. Are you able to help her? I don't know. That's up to you. It depends on how much slack you have in your support infrastructure, how much spare time people have, and what you are willing to do to enable people. But there are lots of other cases like that where you need to be prepared when somebody comes to you for help to tell them whether or not you can help them or whether they need to seek help from their neighbors, their family members, etc. Okay, this is a really interesting problem too. Where to get devices? Okay, many of us, I venture to guess everybody on this call probably already had a headset and a webcam at home, but not everybody will. And for those who don't, I don't know if you shopped for a headset or webcam lately, but it's confusing because you have everything from the $9, mono USB webcams that make you look and sound like you're inside a toilet paper roll, all the way up to very expensive, fancy, Jabra, like the Panicast, which is what we use in our conference rooms. Really nice high-end equipment that can cost $1,000 or more per camera. How do you tell people what to buy? Where do they get it from? Do you already have an IT purchasing relationship that you can unlock to let end users order devices directly and have the company build? Do you tell everybody, hey, go out and get whatever you can find locally and expense it? Or do you tell people, hey, tough nuggets, if you don't already have a webcam, you're on your own? Again, that's not something I can tell you. I would recommend the more commonality of devices you can get. If you can get everybody using the same family of devices, it will lower your support burden. Especially keep in mind that Microsoft has a list of devices that are certified and known to work properly with Teams. And I really, really, really encourage you to buy and use only devices that are certified so you never have the problem of, I don't know what happens. I can hear people on my Teams call, but they can't hear me, for example, right? I'm not saying those problems will never happen with certified devices, but they're a lot less likely. This last bullet is really important. Where can your users go to learn more. This could be a curated selection of links to articles like the one I mentioned earlier that Tony wrote. They could be training videos, training materials that Microsoft makes available to end users. They could be internal only resources that your company either already has developed or develops for this. The content doesn't matter as much as making available whatever you have to people so that they can get up to speed quickly. Now, here's the interesting part. That first phase of email communications is just to bootstrap people and get them onto Teams and help them learn enough to be able to do the basics of here's how you start a meeting, here's how you join a meeting, etc. Once you've done that, then you can start doing your communications in Teams. And that's going to make a huge positive difference because the more people use Teams, the easier and more natural it is for them to continue to use Teams. I really, really, really like Matt Wade's etiquette guide, which is why I've included a link to it here. There are a lot of people who, to put it politely, don't have a great understanding of remote work etiquette in terms of how to use the tools, but also what to expect. And it's a little weird, I will admit, when everybody's working remotely. For example, lots of people have pets. Some have dogs, some have cats, some have both, some have other pets. Some of those pets are noisy or they do things. They appear on camera unexpectedly. Some of you may have seen my cat Pancake join meetings before. Dogs will bark at the mailman or the delivery driver or nothing. And everybody knows that, right? We've all been on conference calls where somebody had a barking dog. Everybody understands how to deal with that. You just sort of politely ignore it. But the guidance that Matt has around how to use the features in Teams to make your experience smoother and sort of have good Teams manners is really valuable. Teach people how to use the test call switch, the test call command. So many of you may not be familiar with this, but if you're in the Teams client on the desktop, click in the command bar and type /test call, and then you'll be able to make an audio or video or audio video test call to the Teams service, where it'll capture your video and audio and play it back to you so you can hear and see what it looks like. This is really useful for troubleshooting problems and understanding, is the lighting okay? Can people actually see me? Do I need to move my microphone? Is there background noise? Is there a hum or a squeak or some other noise that is coming through and annoying people? It's a good idea to coach people to do this whenever they change their hardware devices, just so they get in the habit of checking everything before they get into meetings. Last thing, showing users how to pin chats. I know I said I wasn't going to give a lot of end user tips, and I really meant that, but this one is worth mentioning because the navigation interface for going through chats is just not great. If you have more than a handful of chats, it can be really difficult to find the most critical ones, but if you right-click on the little 3-dot kebab menu, you can pin a chat so it stays up at the top like favorites in Outlook, especially for novice users who are going to have difficulty finding things as that chat list morphs and reorders. That's probably one of the most valuable tips you can give them so that they have sort of a lodestar or a known point of reference where they can always go back and find those important chats without a lot of fumbling. Okay, improvise, adapt, and overcome. I mean, as a Marine, huge fan of Heartbreak Ridge, but that quote from the movie really sums up a lot of the spirit that you need to have for this transitional period. I wanted to mention a few specific cases that I have run into in talking to customers and partners who have gone through this transition. The first one I want to mention is MFA devices. Okay, I've run into this before in airplanes. It's not likely to be a problem for anybody anytime soon, but the basic problem is, how do you MFA when the thing you use to MFA isn't available to you? So one case is you have a cell phone and it quits working. You get a replacement cell phone, but the old cell phone had your authentication app on it that generates the codes that you need to MFA, and you don't have SMS authentication or voice authentication as a backup method. What do? Corollary is you change phone numbers. Your MFA authenticator is still set to your old phone number where you can't get messages anymore. There are other cases like this, but the base case is, number one, you need to be prepared for people who, for example, have a work cell phone and a personal cell phone, and they lose access to one of them and they need to MFA, but the device they don't have was the one with the MFA authenticator, or they buy a new phone or whatever. Their MFA is set to authenticate by calling their work phone. That's another favorite one. If you're not at work. Oh, here's a good one. I just thought of this too. U.S. Army at Redstone Arsenal found that when they went to telework, they told everybody to forward their desk phone to their cell phone. That seems like a very reasonable thing to do because these people all have desk phones and work-issued, government-managed cell phones. What they didn't count on was that if they did that, they would blow up their PBX because PBX couldn't handle that volume of simultaneous forwarded calls. Okay, how would they know that? They hadn't tested it. This is a good example of something that may pop up in this scenario that you never in a million years would have been concerned about before. What outside entities do your users work with? Do you have contractors? Do you have interns? Do you have business partners? Super common at Microsoft, for example, for there to be vendors who sit in the same area and work side by side with people who have Microsoft badges. And that's fine when everybody's in the same building and everybody has access to the same network. But many of those vendors don't have VPN access, so they can't get into Microsoft's corporate network. That's much less of a problem than it used to be because now we have guest users in Teams. We can share files with guests. There are a lot of tools in 365 that help make this problem better. But if you have people who are outside your organizational boundary and not in your Azure AD, you need to figure out what you're going to do to enable those people to keep working with your people. Do you have enough phone licenses? We talked about this already. Be prepared for a surge in day one help desk tickets. We run into this a lot at Quadrotech on the migration side. So we're going through a very complex tenant-to-tenant consolidation. We have a company, a customer that has 135 tenants, and we're migrating them all into a single tenant. And sure as shooting, every time we migrate one of those tenants, we migrate them over the weekend, and Monday morning people come in, and there's a spike in help desk tickets from the users who got migrated. Sometimes it's a big spike, sometimes it's small, but there's always one because things change, right? It doesn't matter how often you tell people in advance, this is what's going to change, this is what you'll see when you log in, here's what's happening. You're still going to have that increase in volume. So every time you move a group or a country or a team to remote work, you should expect there to be a bump in the number of service desk requests you get. And you need to make sure that you're staffed for that, or that you communicate to people what reasonable expectations they should have. This next one is my favorite. What do you do when somebody's hardware breaks? So I'm working at home. I have a company issued laptop and I spill a cup of coffee in it, or my dog bites it in half, or it just quits working. What do? Well, in normal times, what you do is that person would go to the IT facility nearest them and they'd either get it fixed or they'd get a new one. Can you still do that? I don't know. Probably not. If you have devices that have a on-site repair agreement with the manufacturer, can they still honor that? Again, I don't know. That's going to depend on the country where your users are and the vendor from whom you bought the devices. But it is worth looking into because even if this lockdown state only continues for a few weeks, there's going to be some percentages of devices that die, right? That's just part of life in the IT world. Okay, another thing you need to think about is that you may need to shift responsibility for IT. In the Navy, we call this moving the flag. So when the flag admiral leaves one particular ship and moves her flag to another ship, they sort of, weight of command goes with her, and the ship where she ends up is the new quote unquote flagship. So think about this for a second as a practical matter. You have IT operations in a state, and the people in that state are not able to do their jobs for whatever reason. They're restricted to home, there's unreliable internet, there's a giant blizzard. You probably have already run into this situation with natural disasters in the past. But you need to be thinking about, okay, how would I enable people in one region to do IT tasks in another region? Now, the Microsoft way to do that is you just give everybody global admin or some other high privilege role and let them have at it. But there's a better way. You can use delegation and policy control in Nova to say, okay, I'm going to allow this subset of people to manage this subset of users and objects and devices in another state, in another country, in another business unit, using a policy that limits what they're able to do. And then when things start to go back to normal, I can turn that policy off. Finally, things that you should be monitoring or counting or paying attention to. One is how people are using Teams. And I'm going to show you some data in a minute to give you an example of the kinds of things you can learn from this. What do your help desk ticket trends look like? Right? If you're using ServiceNow, Zendesk, Autotask, any good service desk management system will give you analytics that show you what your call volume looks like, what it's doing over time, and help you categorize those calls. Are you getting a lot of calls, for example, for people who are having problems with basic login issues? You're getting a lot of calls from people who are complaining about poor audio video quality. Looking at the calls that you get and what people are filing issues about will help you understand what you need to pivot to fix. Okay, who's posting the most on your all hands or public channels if you have one? I will say, if you, even in a very restrictive lockdown Teams environment, there's a lot of value to having a public, boy, I don't want to say anything goes, but a very lightly moderated discussion channel for people to talk about whatever's on their minds. Microsoft has had great success doing this with Yammer. And Yammer, in all honesty, is a pretty good tool for doing this, but it's a little late in the game. If you haven't already adopted it, I would not suggest that you start learning how to do that right now on top of everything else you're being asked to do. But any kind of open discussion channel like that, it can be really valuable. Because, as Mr. Rogers said, you can always look for the helpers. You'll be able to very quickly spot the people who are doing the most effective job at communicating and helping unblock people and unstick problems. And those would be people that you want to bring into your bubble and build relationships with if you haven't already, because they are the direct interface between your users and your technology. Some of them will be people who already have an official role as being, a help desk person or an IT person or some support role. Others of them will be people who just want to help and have the knowledge and the soft skills to be able to do that. Get those people working with you. Okay, I want to talk briefly about a couple of successful examples that we've run across. The first is from right here in Huntsville. We jokingly call it the Rocket City, but it is the home of NASA's Marshall Space Flight Center, which is the NASA center that owns everything about propulsion for NASA and most of the human spaceflight work. They had a situation a week before last where Friday morning somebody went in for a COVID test. They tested positive. NASA got the results that same day, which you can do if you're NASA. You and I couldn't do it, but if you're a big enough government agency, you get some pull. About 10:30 that night, they sent out a memo to all employees. The center director is a lady named Jody Singer, and she put out a message to everybody at Marshall that said, don't come to work Monday, work from home. Now, NASA was very well positioned to do this for a couple of reasons. One is they already had a plan, and you can see the response framework that they had in place. It's very simple for Dr. Singer to say, hey, Marshall and the Ames Research Center in Mountain View, California had a similar situation. You're going to stage 3. And if you look at the specific things, it was very easy for everybody to understand, what does stage 3 mean? Mandatory telework, okay, limited food service, etc. The other thing that really made this go smoothly for NASA is that they were already using Teams. They had already had drills to practice. Well, what if we had to make everybody telework? Keep in mind, where I live, it's also right in the middle of the tornado belt. So it is not uncommon for NASA to have to make everybody telework. And so they already had some preparation. But there were a couple of interesting aspects. They had to very quickly develop a plan to let people go to work under supervision to get equipment. Not everybody has a laptop. Not everybody has the equipment they need to work from home. And even for the ones who do, it turns out a lot of people don't have the same quality or speed or power of equipment at home as they do at work, right? If I'm doing atmospheric modeling or aerodynamic modeling to model the Buffet forces on a piece of rocket structure, I probably can't do that on my Dell at home. So NASA had a plan to let people go in and check out their work hardware and take it home. Okay. Now, on the one hand, it's easy to say, well, yeah, that's NASA. They have a lot of money, they have a lot of very smart people, and they have plenty of time to practice this in advance, and that's all true. But because they were prepared and because their leadership was able to very quickly make flexible, smart decisions, they have come out of this better than they would have otherwise. And even though you may already be in a situation where you're having everybody have to telework, it's not too late for you to make smart decisions that will benefit you in the future. Okay, another success story. This data comes from a customer of ours who's using Nova. They have about 22,000 seats. And you can see exactly what happened when they switched to telework. And the interesting thing about this graph, when you look at it, you see they're having, in the low hundreds of Teams meetings during the regular work week and none at all on weekends. That's pretty much what you would expect. But look what happens starting on the 11th. That volume starts to rise. It goes up the 11th, 12th, 13th. It drops down again on the 14th and 15th.
Sorry,
Then on
Paul.
the 16th. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul. I think your audio dropped out there. Could you go back to the start of this slide?
Oh, sure.
Sorry.
So the data on this slide comes from one of our customers who's using Quadrotech Nova for reporting and management of their Office 365 environment. And I picked this graph because it shows very graphically what happened with their Teams utilization. They were just barely using Teams, just sort of bumping along at a couple hundred meetings a day, which out of a 22,000 seat organization is not much. But you can see very clearly what had started to happen on the 11th of March. The volume starts to trend up. It drops back down again over the weekend. But on the 16th, 17th, 18th, you can see a spike where they're essentially quadrupling the number of meetings they're having per day. With data like this, the IT leaders and decision makers are able to look at what people are doing with Teams and understand, is everybody able to use Teams? Are there pockets or islands that are doing better or worse than average? Does anybody need extra help? Are we still able to continue our business operations using these tools? And if not, what do we need to change to make that happen? Okay, having the right data is hugely important to making this transition work well. Okay, final reminder. I don't want to dwell on this. I'd like to be a positive person. Everybody's trying really hard. Right? I know you've all seen this in your own communities. The doctors, nurses, first responders, postmen, the people that stock the grocery store. Everybody is doing their best. And even with that, there is still going to be bumps and interruptions. People are going to miss meetings because their kids are acting up or need something. People are going to drop out of meetings because they have a problem with their internet or their Wi-Fi or their webcam or their dog, whatever. Those things are going to happen. Try to stay flexible. Try to make this as fun as you can. Okay. And I realize it didn't sound like this should be a fun thing, but the best I can tell you is this: we started water cooler chats at Quadrotech, and I know a number of other organizations that are either doing water cooler chats or happy hour, where at the end of the day everybody gets together in their own office and gets on video with their favorite beverage, whether that's a cup of coffee or a beer, or I'm a bourbon guy myself, and they just sit and chat with their coworkers in the same way that you would at a bar after work. Just because you can't do it physically, right? And key reminder, we're all being asked to implement what people are misguidedly calling social distancing. That's not true. We're being asked to implement physical distancing. You can still be social, and the social component of your relationships with your coworkers, your partners, your business, your business and personal relationships, maintaining that social closeness is more important now than it has been in a long time. So look for what works well in your organization and do more of that, and look for the things that don't work well and do less of that. That's really the best summary I can give you. So things are going to get better, right? Again, I'm not an epidemiologist. I'm not going to pretend to give you useful advice, but I can tell you, at least on the technology side, Microsoft is working really hard to make the Teams experience get better for meetings. More infrastructure capacity. They're doing things, as I mentioned before, like turning down the amount of video bandwidth, but they're also putting in some fantastic improvements to reduce background noise and echoes to make meetings more maybe not enjoyable, but at least more audible. So stay safe, wash your hands, use good judgment. If you have questions that we're not able to answer in this webcast, I'm going to stick around past the end of the webcast and take questions for as long as I have them. But if you have a question and you didn't get an answer, or you come up with one later, my email address is paul@quadro.tech. Just shoot me an email and I'll do whatever I can to support you. With that said, Quadrotech is awesome. We migrate your data, we help you manage Office 365, and I would say the odds are excellent that we can do things to help you make this transition smoother, but I didn't want to turn this into a commercial. So with that said, I'll leave this slide up for just a second, and Chris, let's get to some questions.
Yeah, great words of wisdom. Thank you, Paul. So question from Germany. Is there any basic best practice for implementing Teams on Office 365 E3 without Azure AD Plan 2 and EMS? We're currently on Azure AD Plan 1 and may be forced to do a rollout for the whole company.
Ouch, that sounds painful. The functionality that you get from the premium Azure AD plans is useful, but it's not directly tied to what you can do with Teams. So the gate, I guess, or the control for Teams functionality is in the Office 365 license itself. So if you've got E3 licenses already, you have the ability to deploy Teams to people and let them use it, even if they don't have associated Pro Plus deployments, because the Teams client is deployed separately. You also always have the option of being able to go to teams.microsoft.com and let people log in and work using the Teams web client. So you can do that even if you don't have the ability to install the Teams client or push the Teams client because you don't have EMS or Intune. That would be where I would start, is first make sure that everybody can go to teams.microsoft.com and log in and participate, and then start looking at what you can do to make sure that the right people get the actual rich client on their machines so that they can work more effectively.
Okay, and following on from that, what would be the best way to disable MFA on Intune enrollment?
So I don't know. I wish I had a better answer.
I thought that might
but
test you.
Right now we're going, I say we, there's a very active thread going on with the Intune team and the Microsoft identity and security MVPs, because Microsoft realizes that's a problem. If you have MFA required for Intune enrollment, you can't MFA if you don't have a device that you can MFA on. It looks like the only way to solve that problem right now is to turn MFA off for a window, let people enroll their devices, and then turn it back on. Microsoft has not said what they're going to do to change that. Are they going to add new functionality, or we don't know, right? But right now there is not a good solution to that other than disabling MFA temporarily.
Cool. Any specific tips for encouraging older employees to be reluctant to use something like Teams?
Boy, that is a really meaty question that we could talk about for a long time. People will use the things that bring them value, right? That's sort of a basic truism. So if people don't want to use Teams, you have to ask yourself, why don't they want to use Teams? Well, some of it is just individual natural personality differences. Some people are afraid of or resistant to change, and there's just not a lot you can do about that. But it's also true that if people see an advantage to using Teams, that a lot of times will push them past that resistance to change. So let me pivot that question around and say, what would you have to do to make Teams so attractive or so compelling that people would be knocking on your door or begging to use it? The short answer is, I don't know, right? Because that's going to depend on who the people are at your organization, what you do as a business. Is it everybody who doesn't want to use Teams, or just some people? Once you have a better understanding of that, and that may require you to pick up the phone and call some people and talk to them and find out what's on their mind. But if you do that, then I think you'll get a better understanding of the specific things you need to do to get that population of users to be more willing to use Teams.
Yeah, it goes back to what you were saying about identifying your power users and encouraging them to show some peer-to-peer influence.
I guess this is like the opposite, right? Whatever the opposite of a power user is, you need to identify
Mm.
those people too and find out what's the holdup. Why are they not using?
Yep. We have a Nova-related question.
Oh, good. I like that.
Can Nova identify who has activated Office 365? And if so, how real-time is that report? The current activation report is
That's
in
an
Office 365
excellent question.
flags. So
Excellent
it's
question.
showing that the current reports, the native report, lags by 48 hours.
So yes, the short answer is we consume the same activation data that Microsoft provides. So we give you the data that Microsoft has at the same time that Microsoft has it. So when they're delayed, we're delayed. I would love to give you a better answer, but the truth of the matter is if you go into the portal and you download the activation report as a CSV, that's the only way Microsoft makes that data available. We have to download it and process it ourselves because they don't have a graph API to get it. They know that is a very common request. So the best thing I can tell you is we have the same data that they do with the same timeliness that they do. Ours is more nicely formatted and you can do more things with it because you can mix it in with other data sources, but it's not any more timely than what you get from their portal.
But the data is stored for much longer, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah, we keep it as long as you have a Nova subscription so you can go back and track it over time.
Mm-hmm. And does Teams rely on Exchange in the cloud or hybrid mode for calendar access? Or can you have an on-premise only Exchange server with remote Outlook client access with no hybrid setup?
So if you want to use Teams, you have to have hybrid connectivity established because without going into all the details of where Teams stores its various data items, there are a bunch of them that get stored in the user mailbox. Now you can do that with mailboxes that are on-prem as long as you have an Office 365 license and a hybrid relationship for those users. But you can't run Teams with a purely on-prem only Exchange environment right now.
Cool. I've noticed that my analytics reports are a few days behind when selecting a date range of the last 7 days or 28 days. Is this normal or am I missing something?
I wish that I could give you better news, but unfortunately it is depressingly normal when you go look at the analytics reports in the portal. Long story short, what happens is that Microsoft has a set of processes that gather the data and a set of processes that take that gathered data and store it and turn it into the analytics reports, and those don't run in sync. You can think of it like a swimming pool. On one side, you have a pipe that pours water into it, and on the other side, you have a pipe that drains water out of it. And depending on how quickly water is flowing through those two pipes, the pool can overflow or the pool can underflow if you're draining faster than filling. And most of the time, the truth of the matter is they gather that data in real time, but it takes a few days to percolate and get into the data store where you can actually see it in the portal.
Cool. Okay. And this question, I think it might just be asking for clarification on something that was covered earlier. Block of legacy auth protocols when you use VPN would be solved by split tunneling. Additional info, when using MFA and VPN, the login is seen as other client and blocked. So I think they're asking if split tunneling would solve this issue.
That is an excellent question. And if I understand what you just said, I think the question is, if I have blocked legacy auth and I'm using split tunneling, it sounds like all the connections are now being blocked, which is not what I would expect. Whoever asked that question, send me a note at paul@quadro.tech, and I'd like to talk to you more to understand what you're talking about and dig into it a little bit to see what I can figure out.
Cool, brilliant. I think that wraps up the question. Oh, sorry, I just spotted another one. When teams are created and they are designed keeping guest user in mind, how can you avoid list or contacts not available to other guests? Would you like me to reread that?
Yeah, please, your audio cut out partway through.
I'm sorry. When teams are created and they are designed keeping guest users in mind, how can you avoid list or contact not available to other guests?
Okay, that's an interesting problem because the membership of a team will always change over time. People join the company, they leave the company, guests may come and go, and so it can be tricky to manage that, because what happens when a guest user leaves, if their account's deleted, then everything that they had previously contributed will just show up as unknown user, which is disturbing and sort of stupid, because if you have that happen enough, you can't tell the difference between Chris, who was a guest who left, and Paul, who was a guest who left. Everything gets lumped together as unknown user. Really, the best thing I can tell you there is think about whether and when it makes sense for you to use private channels to isolate communication that guests shouldn't see. So that way you have maybe a guest-friendly channel or a guest-friendly area in a team, and then one that is only for people who are part of the organization. And that'll minimize the amount of disappearing conversations you see just by helping to keep the internal stuff internal.
Cool, okay. So an update on the question about split tunneling. We had users working from Dubai who used VPN to bypass country block of Skype.
Okay.
When they use VPN and the block legacy auth CA is enabled, the users are unable to sign into Skype as it is seen as other client and blocked due to the legacy auth CA.
Okay. Is the Skype for Business client or the consumer Skype client? I guess we'll have to wait for the questioner to come back.
Perhaps it's one to take offline.
Yeah, I think we should probably take that offline, because I still don't know why that would happen. It doesn't seem like that's the behavior I would expect.
Yeah.
But there's probably some aspect of it that aspect of the environment I don't understand. So follow with me by email and I'll help you dig into it. We'll see what we can find out.
Yeah, Tor, if you email paul@quadro.tech, he'll get back to you on that.
Yep.
Cool, I think that wraps up the questions.
Okay, well, thank you everybody for attending. I appreciate your attention. I know everybody's busy. I hope these tips were helpful. Chris will be sending out a link to the recording and the slide deck in a couple of days, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Paul.
Thanks, Chris. Bye, everybody. Wash your hands.